In this video, I'm going to talk about a concept called attraction and removing the guard. So, on the screen, there's a board position I reached in a game that I was playing probably a year or two ago, and it was the white pieces. I was trying to I felt like there was good stuff on the board. I was just trying to figure out what was going on, and I'll share with you some of the things I was thinking. I was thinking my bishop on g2 kind of looked like I had a nice free piece there, actually. But my concern a little bit was that my opponent might try to trade the queens. And then, of course, if I trade queens, then, well, I'm going to have to take that back and open up my king. I felt like there might be something better, and that's the thing with chess. Always look to see if there's something better. And as I was looking, I discovered the idea of removing the guard, or attraction, which basically forces a piece to move, and when it moves, it moves away, or it moves to a space. You draw it in or attract it to a space you want it to go, or you draw it away from guarding another piece. And when I started to think about that concept, I started to notice what was happening here with my queen, if I were to trade queens, and my rook, if I were to take here. And I thought to myself for a little while, I feel like this is an attraction or removing the guard scenario, because the king, the black king, is actually guarding both of those pieces. So I was thinking about this, saying, you know what? I could take the knight with my rook, which would check the king, and if the king took my rook, then I could take the queen for free. Well, that would be nice. And then I thought about, I wonder if the queen took the queen, that would draw the king away, and then I could take the knight for free. So actually, I could take with the rook, I could take with the queen, and they're both good moves, actually. But I'm thinking here, rook takes knight is far better, because I would like to pick up the queen as opposed to picking up the knight. So the move is rook takes the knight on d6, and that's a check. Now, realizing that that's a check, now black has to deal with it. Now, if black decides to capture my rook, you can see that my queen can capture their queen for free. And I'll move this here and I'll come back. And then, look at that. I removed the king from guarding that queen. That's a check. And now on top of it all, not only is it a check, but I also have a fork, because I'm going to pick up that rook afterwards. And this game, it's time for me to win this game. I should be winning this one, hands down. Now, if I don't feel like taking the rook, I can realize I have another chess tactic or strategy sitting on the board right now, and that's a skewer. Because as I check the king, when the king moves, my queen can take the bishop behind it. And the reason I can take it is because I have another piece guarding that square. So I have so many good moves at this point that black is really just falling apart and their whole position has been crushed. So I'll go back a few moves here to that rook takes. Now, if the king decides not to take the rook because they're like, hey, I don't want to remove the guard, I don't want to move away from it, well, it might be that even worse things happen, because, well, if it moves back to e7, it's now created a pin, and because my queen now has its queen pinned, and not to mention my rook my rook and my queen are both attacking the queen. So this game's actually going to end really quick, because my queen's just going to take the queen anyways, realizing that the rook is guarding that piece. The king's in check. The king really doesn't have much to do, but the only move that can be made is the king can really just move back, and this game's pretty much over. So that's not a good option. Well, let's just say the king plays here, because hey, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get my queen pinned. And well, guess what? It's the same problem, because I'm just going to take that with my queen, and now they've got big problems again. So this is really, really nice. And that's kind of the big idea behind removing the guard. That king is guarding both the queen and the knight, but I'm going to draw it away so that I can pick up a piece there. I'm going to move on to a different board position. And in this one's actually, I'm not gonna like win the game here, but this is, in my opinion, a decent move. And by no means am I ever saying that these are all best moves. They're all good moves, but sometimes there might be better. My goal in this video is to show the idea of attraction or removing the guard. So in this board position, I'm looking at my rook on e1, and I'm eyeballing that. Now, number one, it's under attack, so I don't want to like give my rook up. And so I'm eyeballing that. Like, what if I take that rook? And if I take that rook, I can see that my opponent does have a piece guarding it, and that would be their queen. Now, if I take the rook, I'm gonna bet that they're gonna take back with their queen, which they should do. Otherwise, I'm getting a free rook. Because, by the way, when I take that piece, it's going to be check. So not only is that check, but I have my queen sitting here that's pretty much got this thing trapped inside. So they don't really have much of an option here to take that back, because that black king is in a whole lot of trouble with a lot of stuff aiming at it. So note though, when I do take it, and I'm going to take that check, notice again there's the check. Now black really only has a couple of options. Black could block the check with their knight. That's going to be bad, though, I can tell you that already, because I could just take it, because my queen is guarding that square. Or black can take my rook back. Now, the whole idea behind me doing that is I discovered a remove the guard or an attraction scenario. I'm attracting this black queen to a square, and I'm removing its guard. It's important to note that that black queen was actually guarding this square right here. The black queen was actually guarding that pawn. And so when it moves away, now notice I have a piece attacking that pawn. This knight is attacking that pawn right now. And so black doesn't really have much of an option but to take my rook back. And what I've done is I've drawn that queen away. I've attracted it to a different square. I've removed its guard, and now I can use my knight to take a pawn. Now, in this combination, I've only won or gained a pawn. I've traded a rook for a rook, but I got a pawn in return. At the same time, I'm starting to get my knight developed away from the edge of the board. It would really like to start to somehow pop over into over here, and then maybe check here to maybe even win the game if they let me. So I'm kind of eyeballing these great ideas, and not to mention my bishop now is attacking another pawn. And I just have to be really careful about not getting too carried away, because I can't let black's pawns on F4 and the H4 pawns, I don't want to let them pass or promote. But that's another attraction or removing the guard scenario. I'm going to move on to another one, which is really kind of interesting. In this position, I can tell that I've kind of got my pieces all like down here bearing down on the king. I've got this rook, I've got my queen, I've got even this bishop here that's it's got a knight pinned there. And actually, even more importantly, I do notice a few other things on the board, but the move in this case is actually for my bishop to take that knight. Now the question is, can you see why? What I'm doing is I'm attracting the king, and I'm removing it, or in this case I'm not removing a guard in any sense. I'm actually attracting the king to a square that I want it to go to. And here's why. When I take that, it's check. And the king has no option. There is nowhere to go. The king has to take it. Now, I noted before I made that move, and the reason I made that move was the rook, my rook has this line cut off. My other rook has this line cut off. And notice that king is in a whole lot of trouble. And I've discovered that I have a checkmate on the board. That checkmate is if I were to play the queen to g8. When I play that queen to g8, it's checkmate, because there's just nowhere for this thing to go. That king cannot move anywhere on that diagonal. The king can't move forward because this rook's got it covered, and the king can't move sideways. The rook's got it covered, and there's no way to block that check. It's checkmate, it's over. That's kind of cool. The last scenario that I'm going to go over is kind of tricky, but it's kind of neat, and it's not like a checkmate, but it's a pretty big advantage. So this is kind of an attraction, or actually removing guard, just opening up the king in a way. And this, you have to be really careful with these kinds of moves, and I'm going to fly through this fairly quick because they don't always work. But the key here is for me to play a knight takes pawn check. And notice then that it's attacking that king. Now I'm thinking that when I play that check, I'm thinking that this pawn is going to take back. So I'm going to play that check there and take a look at what's going to happen after that. Now, if they take back, which is probably the most logical move, what I've done here is I've removed a guard. Their pawns are kind of guarding the king, and now I'm going to use my bishop to take that pawn. With the bishop takes pawn now, I have a lot of attacking going on here. I've got a queen that's kind of bearing down. It can't play there yet, but it's looking at maybe a check with a checkmate right there. It's looking at, it can check on this square if it needs to. There's a lot of stuff happening. And so let's say that the king decides to, well, and be honest, I don't know where they're going to go, because if they move to h8 to just try to stop all this mess, and I decide to play a move, and I'll just set this up more. Now, a lot of you might just take this piece here. I wouldn't say it's horrible, but it's not the best option at this point, because if I lose that bishop, I don't have the checkmating potential with just my queen by itself. So chances are I'll play something like queen to h3. Now this is setting up a discovered check. Discovered check, I'm looking at my queen's got a free check, and I can just move this bishop if I want. Okay, so black piece is going to have to decide where to play, and they're going to probably save their rook somehow. Now, let's just say they decide to save the rook here. They're like, hey, I better kind of stop all this stuff, this mess here. Okay, and they play it there. Now, that might seem, I guess, like a good move to stop stuff from coming in, but there's kind of a crazy move here for white. It's bishop to f8, which seems like, hey, why are you moving your bishop there? You just take it. Well, no, you can't. It's checkmate. Don't forget, that was a discovered check, which means the bishop can go anywhere it wants almost. You wouldn't want to place it onto this square because it could just be taken by the king. And the key point is I put it here because now it blocks this square off. The king has no escape, and it's being checked. In fact, it's checkmate. So removing the guard or opening it up or attracting pieces to certain squares can be very powerful. Keep those things in mind. They're very tricky. Sometimes they're very hard to find. That's why you need to take a little bit of time to think through your chess moves.